Hey, what's up you guys? I have not filmed a video like this in so long. I have not sat down and talked to the camera in quite a while. I think the last time I actually did it maybe was some of my Japan vlogs, and then even like halfway through Japan I got fed up of vlogging and stopped. So I'm not promising regular videos or anything like that, but I was just inspired to sit down and talk about some of the books I've read recently. I feel like this year I've been reading a lot more. I don't know if that's actually true, but it feels true. I've really been deep into some little projects as I like to do, and yeah, I just wanted to sit and talk about some of the books I've read recently, specifically the Stephen King ones. I've got three kind of little projects going on right now. Me and some of my friends have been rereading the Shadowhunter series because there's a new book out later this year, so I've been reading one a month and that's been really fun. And then I don't know if you follow me on Goodreads or Letterboxd, but I have become obsessed with Star Wars the last few years. So especially Goodreads, you'll see I read last year so many Star Wars books and comics, and I kind of want to make videos about those, but the Star Wars world is crazy. People are like so intense on it. So I have been like tempted to do that a couple times, but I haven't done it yet. But I did think, you know what, safe. Let's talk about Stephen King. Everyone likes Stephen King. Or everyone likes at least a Stephen King book or film or whatever. So I have been really getting into him again. I've always been a fan, especially since I started reading again in 2019. I've read quite a few of his like classics, but I have just been inspired recently to pick him up some more. And the thing with Stephen King is he has so many books that once you start, you just don't want to stop, because you're like, okay, well, there's this one and there's this one and this kind of leads into that, and you know, there's connections, and it just becomes a whole thing. Kind of like Star Wars, you know, not so interconnected, but you know, it just happens. You go into one, it leads on to the next and the next and the next. Before you know it, you're reading nothing but Stephen King and Star Wars, or at least that's been my experience so far in the past year or so. So yeah, today I'm going to talk about three Stephen King books that I've read recently, and then I think at the end I'm going to talk about some films I've watched as well, very briefly, because I have watched some Stephen King films. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, please subscribe, please comment down below if you're still alive. I don't even know if my subscribers are still alive, if they care that I'm talking about books, but you know, if you're here, thank you for watching, and leave a little comment. So yeah, let's get started. The first book that I want to talk about that I've read recently is The Body by Stephen King, and this was adapted to the film Stand By Me, so it's probably more famous by that name. I didn't realise the book was called The Body until I picked it up. But this is about four boys who go on a little mini adventure to try and find a dead body that one of them overhears their older brother talking about. It's like in the woods, a few miles away, can't remember. It takes them like a couple days to get there. But the search for the body is like kind of more secondary to just like this coming of age story about friendship. And you basically see these four boys discover like their own mortality and the kind of realizations that friendships are not forever. And there's a lot of discussion about, you know, the romanticization and the kind of like nostalgia that we put onto our childhood friendships. There's a really good quote that basically says, I'm gonna mess up, it's like, you have never had a friend as good as you did when you were 12. That's not the actual quote, that's like me coming up with a quote, but it's so true. It's like those friendships as children are so strong. It doesn't mean that your adult friendships are not strong and not meaningful, but because when you're adults, you have whole other lives, you have relationships, and your family, you know, becomes more part of your life in a way because your parents get older and, you know, everything like that. You have your own house. Whereas when you're kids, all you need to worry about really is going to school with your friends and then hanging out with your friends after school. So there's a lot of talk about that, and it's just really thought-provoking, and it really makes you think about your own friendships and, you know, your own childhood. And hopefully everyone's childhood is nicer than the kids in this book, because there's so much casual cruelty in this book. The kids do not live in a very pleasant world, which I guess the real world isn't very pleasant either, but there's just something about, you know, reading it in fiction that really like gets to your heart. There's a lot of like abuse and neglect and stuff that goes on in this book, and it is quite a short one, but it really packs a punch. And something that is really interesting as well is the fact that there's four of these boys. Two of them are quite mature for their age, and the other two are not. And it kind of goes through like the friendship dynamics of that kind of group, where two of the friends are more on the same page. And, you know, it also makes you think about that whole thing about like people are in your life for like a reason or a season, or a lifetime. And, you know, like the immature friends aren't necessarily going to be friends for life. And there's a whole discussion where one of them says to the protagonist, I'm so bad with names, by the way, I didn't even try and remember the names for the review, but I read this a couple of months ago. They're basically like, you need to get out because you are better than us, you're smarter than these guys, and if you continue to hang around these guys, even though we're friends, they're going to drag you down, and you're basically going to waste your life away. Which is very profound for like 12-year-olds to like realize and talk about. And obviously it is through an adult author, but yeah, it's just one of those books that has a lot to say about those kind of topics. There's also, because the main character is like a writer, there's 2 little like short stories that he writes which are very interesting. They feel quite jarring and random, but they are definitely interesting. They're probably my least favorite part of the book, but I suppose they do add to the overall themes that are going on. But yeah, The Body was really good. I have seen Stand By Me a couple of years ago. I want to rewatch it. It's been a while, especially with like the book kind of semi-fresh in my mind. It would be interesting to rewatch it. But yeah, if you don't really like horror, this is definitely one for you. There's still some gruesome moments. There's still some like everyday horror, like I've seen, like the trauma and the abuse and stuff. But it's not like a horror story. I think it's the first Stephen King book that I've read that isn't necessarily a horror story, so that was interesting. But yeah, I really enjoyed The Body. The next Stephen King book that I read was Salem's Lot, and this is a chunker. And I did not realise until I think I was midway through and I was like just online searching that this is actually Stephen King's second ever published novel, which was so impressive to me because it is so detailed, it is obviously thick, it is rich, it is full of like modern history mixed with the mythology, and I was just so blown away, especially because Carrie, which is a classic in its own right, is written in like a epistolatory method or narrative, which is very different. And this is like such a classic, just like a literature, like rich text. And basically, if you don't already know, Salem's Lot is about a town that's taken over by vampires, and you follow a group of characters who are in the town, and they're the ones who sort of realise that something's going on, and they try to solve it. But what Stephen King does so well in this, and it's definitely a theme that runs throughout a lot of his books, is that he makes the entire town feel so alive because he jumps into like so many different random minor characters' heads, and sometimes you're only with them for 5 pages, 10 pages, but you really get a full feel for the entire town and everyone that lives there and everything that's going on, so that when the vampires really do start to take over, you see this town kind of fade away into nothingness. And because you've spent a little bit of time with all these different characters, it just hits so much harder. And that was one of my favourite things about Salem's Lot, was just the richness of the town, and how much time you really get to spend getting to know everyone, and then to have that all ripped away. It was so impactful. And I also love, so the vampires in this are just very traditional, like Dracula style vampires, which was fun because it just plays that classic mythology but brings them into, I think, the 1950s, like a small town US. And that was good because I feel like a lot of authors, when they write vampire stories, feel the need to put their own twist on it. Obviously, I am a big Twilight fan. If you've been here for a while, I have all Twilight books here. And like I do love that kind of thing, but it's actually rarer than you think to get just like a classic vampire story, and King does that here, and he does it so well. The vampire scenes are quite horrific. There's especially like a whole part where, you know, children are easy victims. You can read a lot into that with like real life allegories and stuff like that. But seeing like the vampires going after the kids is just like heartbreaking, and it was just so rich and so detailed and also horrifying. So I really recommend Salem's Lot if you're a vampire fan. I feel like this is a must read. I feel like it's probably one of those stepping stones where like Dracula is kind of like the defining text, and then I feel like in the modern day people are going to hate this, but Twilight is like the defining text. Like Salem's Lot is like a good in between where it's still got a lot of the classic mythology and tropes, but it brings in the modern, the American. So I recommend this so much. Not even if you're just a vampire fan, if you just are a fan of sprawling stories in general, because like I said, you meet so many different characters, you spend a lot of time with them. And then this edition as well also has some short stories that are connected to it. I will say that was quite jarring for me because I got to what I didn't realise was the end of the novel. And I think when you get to the end of a novel and you are very aware, like, okay, this is the last 2 pages, there's something in your brain that makes them read differently. But because I thought that the story was about to continue, I never like took in the ending, and I kept reading, and I'm reading like the short story, which is called Jerusalem's Law, and in my head I thought it was just like a continuation of the ending. So that kind of messed me up. I had to reread the ending, but yeah, it was a very good book. There's so many characters. At times it's hard to kind of remember who's who, but you also don't really need to. That's not really the point. Other than like the main core cast, all the wider characters, the point is just to understand that this is a very alive town. Everyone has rich, complex inner lives, and you think about that in real life. Like you walk past 100 people in the street, and you don't know any of them, you don't know anything about their lives, but every single one of those people has such complex inner desires and wants and needs and issues and problems, and King lets you kind of jump into all these different people's heads and get a glimpse inside. So yeah, love Salem's Lot. Definitely recommend this one. Lastly, today I want to talk about Apt Pupil, and this was a book that I thought I knew the premise of, but I actually had it all twisted up. So I kind of knew like the book cover and the movie poster, and I thought it was about a young boy who discovers that his teacher is a Nazi, and the teacher then kind of starts to torment the boy. In reality, it's King, because of course nothing is that simple in Stephen King's world, twists that on his head, and he has basically this 13-year-old boy show up at his neighbour's door, and he's like, knock knock, I know who you are. And the neighbour's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, I think you do. And Mr. Dussender, I think that's it. And he's like, no, my name is Denker. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the boy is like, I love Nazis. I love World War II. I have read all the magazines. I've seen all the gruesome pictures, and I know who you are. And I've dusted your fingerprints, and I've compared your photographs. And if you don't tell me all the dirty, dark, horrible details about World War II and the Nazis, then I'm going to expose you. So it's basically this 13-year-old boy who's so twisted, tormenting his neighbour mentally into telling him all the disgusting details from World War II. And if Salem's Lot gives that kind of fear of what if there's actually vampires next door taking over the town, this is so realistic, because it is like, what if your next door neighbour is a Nazi or a psychopathic 14-year-old boy? And what is so disturbing about this book is that obviously with Salem's Lot, there's scary scenes involving vampires, but in your head you're like, okay, it's still fiction, it's vampires, it's fantasy. The horror in Apt Pupil comes from the descriptions of what is going on in the Nazi concentration camps, and it just gives you such a sick feeling in your stomach, because your brain can't dismiss it as fiction, because you know that these things actually did happen. And in fact, the stuff that's described in the book, probably worse stuff than that even happened in real life, because these people were just so horrible and so inhumane, and there's not even words to describe it. So it's a tough read at times, because King really goes in there with the gore and the horror and like the descriptions of like these poor people in the concentration camps, and what this Nazi did to them. But at the same time, you have Todd, who is 13 at the start of the novel. It kind of goes over a few years. He ends up 16, I think, at the end. And he is just psychopathic, and he is basically getting off in more ways than one to all of this horror. And over time, the way that they discuss this isn't really spoilers at all, by the way, but over time, because they're talking about it so much and it's all they talk about, it consumes both their brains, and Todd becomes even more darker and dangerous and scary, and the Nazi Mr. Dussender, I suppose, also like just it consumes both their brains and minds, and it's all they can think about. So it's definitely a tougher read in a sense, because the horror is very real, it's very grounded and scary, but it is so impactful and it's so good. And I actually think out of the three, this was probably my favourite, just because it was such like a gut-wrenching, like it's short, but you sometimes don't want to continue reading because it's just so horrible, but then just King's writing style is so captivating that you also at the same time you can't put it down. And I think this is probably the King book that has disturbed me the most, and it's because, like I said, all the horror is real, and in fact, the real life horror is probably even worse than what he's talking about here. And it's funny because I love horror films, I love horror books. I don't like true crime at all. I'm not into like that stuff at all. I very much like my horror to be like in a fictional sense. So when you're confronted with like the gruesome, disgusting reality of the world, it's not easy to stomach. But yeah, Apt Pupil was absolutely fantastic. And then I will then just segue this. I also watched the Apt Pupil film. I finished this in the morning, then watched the film at night. That stars Ian McKellen as the Nazi and Brad Renfro as the boy. They age him up a little bit. I think he's like 16. And the film also takes place over like 1 year rather than like 3 years. And it was good. And I think that if I watched the film just as a film, I would have enjoyed it more. Because it is a good film. It's very well made. Bryan Singer's the director, which is a bit icky, especially when you think about some of the subtext and things like that that go on. If you know, you know, Bryan Singer is not a very nice person. But they strip so much of the darkness and the depravity out of the book. It was the film, sorry. The book has spent so much time in the characters' minds, and obviously film can't really do that. So It's just not the same. It's not as violent. It's not as dark. It doesn't go into as much detail. It's very like sanitized is the word I would use. It's still a good film. But this one, like, this is definitely a horror book, whereas the film is more like a thriller. But that kind of like cat and mouse game between the two characters, where it starts off with Todd blackmailing the Nazi, and then starts to get flipped on his head a little bit. It does work in both adaptations, but I think the book is just so much more impactful because it is so dark, which obviously isn't for everyone. And like I said, it is hard to read, but yeah, I would definitely recommend the book. Read the book, then watch the film. I feel like it's such a cliche saying the book is better because that's not always true, but in this case, definitely true. That is all of the books I'm going to talk about today. I was also going to maybe talk about some of the films. I rewatched The Mist last night. That is such a good book film. I think that's actually my favourite Stephen King adaptation. It's just such a gut punch. Like, if you know, you know. It is just one of the bleakest films ever. But it's so good. The acting, directing, everything about it is so good. The CGI is a little bit dodgy at times, but it's also from 2007. But the film is just so good that you completely overlook that. So I enjoyed that. And then I also have watched all of the Children of the Corn films. They are a mixed bag. A lot of them are better than you expect. I think there's 11 of them overall. And I kept waiting for like this one to be the one that like broke the camel's back and just be absolute trash. And it took a lot longer to get there than you would expect. There's more bad. I would say there's more good than bad there. A lot of 3 stars, like, but you know, better than I expected. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video talking about some Stephen King books. The next ones I'm going to read, I'm very interested in Rage, because this is about a school shooter and he actually withdrew this from publication. You can't buy new editions of it anymore. So something about that, you know, banned books, it's always interesting. And then Roadwork also interests me as well. I've read The Running Man before and I've seen The Long Walk, so I'm quite interested in these 2 Bachman books, which was like Stephen King's pen name. And from what I gather, his Bachman books are a lot more like angry, a lot more juvenile in a way, even though he wrote them when he was older, because they're just like, there's a very angry tone to them, is what I've always heard online. So it'll be interesting to explore that. But yeah, Rage and the Rage and Roadwork, they're next I'm going to read. So if people enjoy this, if people watch it, I might be back and talk about those. Plus, I have a lot more Stephen King books over here. You can't even see on my shelves. I should maybe do an updated like library tour. This is only 2 out of... There's 5 bookcases, but one of them's all Lego. So there's like 4 bookcases here. We have a lot of books. So I can maybe do that at some point soon. But yeah, it's been fun. I hope people enjoy. I hope people watch. Again, leave a comment down below. Anything you want. Just say hi. Let me know you're alive. Let me know this wasn't a waste of time. But, you know, even if it was a waste of time, I enjoyed it. So again, thank you for watching, and I will see you maybe, probably, in my next video.